Yeah. Hello, everybody. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, and welcome to my presentation. It's Subtypes of Developmental Dyslexia. My name is Julia Koifman, and I am from Israel. It's 3:20 in the morning in Israel. Yes, and I'm here to give you a presentation. Well, so let me introduce myself. I live and work in Israel. I'm an English teacher at the School for Special Education. My students are between 15 and 18 years old. They have different learning disabilities, neurodiversity, mainly dyslexia, dysgraphia, hyperactivity, autism spectrum disorder, and many more. I'm a regular conference presenter. I present at ETI, English Teachers Association of Israel, IATFL, HSO, and many others organizations for English teachers. Also, I'm a PhD candidate at Atlantic International University. I study virtually, and I'm about to finish my program. In the end of my presentation, I'm going to demonstrate my thesis. Yeah. The topic of my research is inclusive needs and spatial education. Well, here is my outline. I'll present the topic, the research questions I work on, and tell about the process of reading, percepting, and learning. Which part of the human brain is responsible for reading, and the part of the role of each part of the brain. Next part is neuroscience and dyslexia, sorts of dyslexia, and also neurobiological and psycholinguistic support. No. Let me start my presentation with the quotation of Albert Einstein. He said, "Everybody is a genius, but if you judge a fish by its ability to climb a tree, it will live its whole life believing that it is stupid." So let our students who study differently not to feel that they are stupid. Indeed, there are a lot of famous people who suffered from dyslexia. For instance, Leonardo DiCaprio, George Bush, and many more. So the right psycholinguistic approach can help people overcome this disorder. Here are my research questions. The educators have always asked themselves the question, why do some students do well and others struggle? Indeed, what one student needs only 1 hour, and for the same material, some students need 3 or 5 hours. So people differ, and the abilities differ. Next, what does resilient dyslexia mean? Is it possible to overcome? Indeed, the research says dyslexia is not possible to overcome, or almost not possible. But educators can prevent school difficulties with the help of some methods I'll tell about them later. Next, do resilient dyslexic have distinct brain structures that allow for better resiliency? Or is their success in reading a result of compensation strategies that alter the density of neurons in specific brain region? The researchers from Tel Aviv University and not only investigate this question. Next, is it possible to find out about dyslexia in very young kids? Yeah. I have researched some studies of the scientists from Tel Aviv University and the University of California. Nowadays, it's possible. And finally, what are the sources of dyslexia? And if it is possible to prevent them, or at least predict. Well, here is the brain structure. There are 4 main parts of the brain structure: the frontal lobe, the parietal lobe, the occipital lobe, and temporal lobe. Each part is responsible for different aspects of our learning. Thus, the frontal lobe handles speech production, reading fluency, grammatical usage, and comprehension. Next part is the occipital lobe, which is associated with processing visual information. It may also help with imagination and creativity. The parietal lobe is the part of the brain that turns letters into words and further thoughts. The temporal lobe is responsible for phonological awareness, decoding, and discriminating sounds. Thus, normally, these parts of the brain work together. And if, in case of disorders, one or some parts of the brain work differently, or they don't work appropriately, and different sorts of disorders happen. But according to the research, dyslexia is not a brain disorder. Neuroscientists claim that dyslexia is a learning difficulty, or nowadays they claim it's a learning difference, that due to a neural base, depending on biological and environmental factors, and experience developing properties and improving reading skills. In general, dyslexia is characterized as severe learning disability, specific reading disability, problems with phonological awareness, reading impairment, difficulty processing letter sound relationship. In bilingual kids, it is more difficult because that's Israeli kids whose first language is Arabic or Russian or French, they find it difficulty. They find it difficult to relate the letters in their mother tongues and English as a foreign language. I am an immigrant myself. I come from Ukraine, and my mother tongue is Russian, and I also speak Ukrainian, Hebrew, and a little French. As for me, I don't have any dyslexia or disorders, but even me, as a speaker of some languages, sometimes I find it difficult to correspond letters. In kids with learning disabilities, it's much more difficult. Well, why? Because the dyslexia is a part of neurodiversity. So when we examine dyslexia, we can deal with neuroscience. Educators also involve speech-language therapy, educational practice, educational psychology, school psychology, developmental psychology, linguistics, cognitive psychology, clinical psychology, and medicine. You see, neurodiversity usually has a lot of sources. Thus, the dyslexia rarely comes alone. It often comes with such disorders as dysgraphia, dyscalculia, ADHD, and autistic spectrum disorder. Each child differs, so kids need different approach. What are the types of dyslexia? It can be developmental or innate, which it's from birth, or deep dyslexia. It is acquired due to brain traumas or diseases. In this presentation, I'm not going to tell you about deep dyslexia, which was the result of brain trauma or infections such as meningitis and others. But deep dyslexia has very similar symptoms, and kids need individual approach and therapy. But what about developmental dyslexia? Well, my presentation deals with the subtypes of developmental dyslexia, and let me introduce two main subtypes, such as primary dyslexia and secondary. Thus, primary dyslexia runs in families. It is a genetically inherited disorder. So, if parents or grandparents struggled at school, their descendants might struggle with reading and writing, spelling, and other things also. Thus, if one sibling and if brothers and sisters have dyslexia, if one child has dyslexia, his brother or sister also might have. It's not compulsory, but there is a possibility of dyslexia. Thus, I have taught some kids from the same family. Usually, Israeli families are big, and in different times, I taught 5 kids from the same family. And the elder daughter, then her 2 twin sisters, identical twins, who had the same symptoms of dyslexia, and 2 twin brothers. They were also identical twins, and all the 5 kids had very, very similar disorders. Secondary dyslexia comes from problems with brain development during pregnancy. Thus, if nobody in the family has learning disabilities, if mother suffers from some diseases during pregnancy, the child might have a learning disability further. Yeah. Well, as I have already told, each child is different. And Thus, developmental dyslexia has a lot of heterogeneities. The main heterogeneities are the surface dyslexia, when children struggle with orthographic coding skills, and that whole word recognition and spelling. Kids can pronounce words quite well, but find it difficult to read words or spell it differently. Although they can write the words well, they can misunderstand. Yeah. Another sort of dyslexia is phonological. It means that the students find it difficult to match the letters to sounds. And the function of a phonemic system is underdeveloped. And children struggle with decoding, and they read by guess. Thus, if surface dyslexia enables kids read words and sentences quite well, but spell it differently, so phonological dyslexia is kids might have a big vocabulary. They know a lot of words, but while reading, they just guess. Also, many dyslexic kids are left-handed. Thus, as I have mentioned, two twin sisters, identical twins, one of them was right-handed and another left-handed. Probably in the psychology or in the physicians and the pediatricians call these twins like mirror twins. Yeah, but these mirror twins had very similar symptoms. In my opinion, both of them had surface dyslexia. While reading, when I asked them to read the words and short text, they read them well, but they didn't understand. And some years later, I taught the twin brothers, from the twin identical brothers from the same family. Both of them were left-handed, and they had hyperactivity. And unlike twin sisters, the twin brothers from the same family had phonological dyslexia, and they read by guess. Yeah. Well, now let me introduce a brief history research on developmental dyslexia. The term developmental dyslexia was firstly mentioned by Dr. Prince Morgan in 1896. 1896. It was characterized as word blindness, poor visual memory, but about 70 years later, in the 1960s, dyslexia was characterized as congenital word blindness, reading and spelling problems, behavioral and emotional problems, and an average or high IQ. Indeed, many kids with dyslexia have a high IQ. They may be good at they may struggle with learning foreign languages or reading and writing in their native language. Thus, I have told about my students whose native language was Hebrew. And Hebrew speakers or Arabic speakers find it the most difficult because in Semitic language, they write from right to left, while English and other European languages are written from read and written from left to right. And that's why many Hebrew and Arabic speakers practice mirror reading. They confuse the letters and often read and write from right to left. Up to the last few decades, educators found that students had dyslexia by the age of 4 or 5. Sorry. Usually, kindergarten teachers noticed that kids of 4 and 5 find it difficult, for example, to tie shoelaces, to do some minor things with their fingers, to read and to calculate and to write. Or even teachers in the primary school noticed that students in the first grade cannot read and write, although they have a high IQ. Despite high IQ, students find it difficult to study. But nowadays, it is possible to find out potential dyslexia even in babies. As I have already mentioned, scientists from Tel Aviv University and the University of California researched babies' brain whose parents struggled at school. It is told about primary dyslexia, which runs in families, or genetic dyslexia. According to their hypothesis, the brain area responsible for executive function and working memory of the left hemisphere in resistant dyslexic had a large amount of gray matter, which means that the babies might have a high IQ in their future. And indeed, some years later, kindergarten teachers noticed that such kids struggled in reading. Not all of them, but many of them. Nowadays, due to this research, due to MRI research in babies, it is possible to predict potential dyslexia. And when the child goes to the kindergarten or in the nursery school, start teaching them using the spatial methods before they start school. So when their brains are trained in school, they will have much less difficulties with reading, spelling, memorizing, and speech producing, both oral and written speech. Dyslexia is impossible to overcome totally, but it is possible to reduce the difficulties. So, what are the effective ways of overcoming dyslexia? It means games to enhance receiving information. Moreover, some dyslexic kids might have other problems. For instance, autistic spectrum disorder. Not necessary, but they might have. Many kids have problems with demonstration their emotions, and the kindergarten teachers can use flashcards and ask the kids, what do you see in this card? What is the person doing? Is he or she smiling? Or maybe he or she is angry? Or maybe he's crying? Or maybe he's indifferent? Can you demonstrate this emotion, this face expression? And if a child demonstrates, you can say, oh, great. So you can demonstrate. Thus, improvisation helps them express their emotions. And expressing emotions, the emotion intelligence, also enhances the learning in future and later. Demonstrating the letters, the different colors of letters. For instance, the teacher can demonstrate vowels in red or consonants in green. And there are also some options. And also, the teacher can ask, what's the difference between vowels and consonants? Vowels are pronounced. For instance, this is the letter A. How can you pronounce it? A. Can you sing it? A. Oh. And this, the consonant. What is this letter? This is the letter B. What is the sound of the letter B? B. And please, can you match these letters? For instance, the teacher shows a picture of a cat. What is this? This is a cat. Can you match the letters? C, A, T. Or the teacher can make a mistake. The teacher can misspell the letter cat. For instance, instead of cat, this is the letter act or tech or kta. So the child can rearrange the word. In this way, the neurons are formed in the brain. So these games can also train the working memory. Also, psycholinguistic approach works well. What does it mean, psycholinguistic? It's psychology and linguistic. Psycholinguistic approach claims that working memory must be trained. Our memory consists of long-term memory and short-term memory. What does short-term memory means? What the children study during the lesson, they're supposed to use it immediately. Thus, very young kids learn some cognates and letters, or how to spell elementary words. So they need to operate these skills immediately. It is called a short-term memory. And later, the short-term memory goes to the long-term memory, so that children will use this knowledge to operate them later. Or it's a reminiscent work. Due to it's a reminiscent memory, children might forget something, but when it is necessary, the necessary word comes up immediately. Thus, for instance, English and Hebrew are not my native languages. Sometimes I might forget some words, but those who speak 3 languages and more can suddenly remember the necessary words. What else? It's a multisensory teaching. What does it mean? We must use 3 main senses. The sense of sight, hearing, and touch. Thus, when kids see the words, they hear, for instance, a cat. How do you spell the cat? C-A-T. It is also useful to make them touch the words, or they can make the words of plastilin or from paper. And then also, when they make the words themselves, make the letters, they touch them. It's also useful because it works for development of motor skills. Thus, young kids can button or unbutton their clothes and do some minor things with their fingers, which also helps them develop their brain and their fingers. And also music and physical exercises. Thus, singing also works well, because when children learn, when they sing songs in English as a foreign language, they memorize the vocabulary, sentence structure, and how these words sound. And physical exercises are also good, because there are three main styles. The visual style of learning, when visual memory works. Some students are oral learners, when they hear the words and repeat them better. And some kids are kinesthetic learnings. Thus, they memorize, for example, how many syllables are in their words. For example, Tel Aviv. How many syllables are there? 3 syllables. Or Israel. How many syllables? 3. Or, for example, blackboard. Or from electricity. So they can tap electricity. How many words? How many syllables does this word have? 4. Okay. Now, since I'm pressed for time, I cannot tell you more about it, but you can find it in my thesis. I have almost finished my PhD, and my thesis is published. You can download it, and now I am ready to answer your questions.